Hi boys and girls, it's me, Mr. Josh. I'm here to teach you about chess. Today we're going to talk about the pawn. The pawn sits on file B with all of his little brothers. Now today we're just going to talk about one pawn at a time, so we don't really need all of them. So let's just talk about how this pawn moves. Now, the pawn, as I said, sits on file B. You'll notice that each of the squares has a letter and a number corresponding to that square. File B and rank 5, in this case, is where this pawn is seated. So we call that space B5. Now, the pawn is sitting on B5 on what I like to call the bed. Okay? I'm going to tell you a story about the pawn and how he was jumping on the bed. One day, the pawn was jumping on the bed, and his mom came by and said, "Sonny, you better be careful if you're jumping on the bed. Don't jump backwards or you'll fall off and die." So the pawn was a good little boy, and he didn't jump off backwards because he would fall off and roll around and die. Instead, he jumped forward. Now, when the pawn sits on the bed, you can see that he can actually jump off of the bed 2 squares. If he's not sitting on the bed, though, or lying down on the bed, he can't jump that high. He can only jump 1 square at a time. Now, if he wants to, he can hop off the bed, and that's just fine. He can move 1 square at a time, right? But if he feels like he has to attack an opponent, then he has to use his special power. And his special power is to use his tiny little arms. Look at this huge fat bald head. Okay? That's the big bald head of the pawn right there. And these are his tiny little arms. In fact, he reminds me of a certain animal. I happen to have a CGI version of that animal right here. But be prepared, it's very scary. Oh my, I hope you weren't too scared by that Tyrannosaurus Rex. Well, the Tyrannosaurus Rex has a huge head and tiny little arms, just like our pawn. Now, the pawn, because of his big bald head, has to be careful where he goes, otherwise he's going to fall over onto it. So, what he does is when he attacks, he can't attack in front of him. Just like the Tyrannosaurus Rex couldn't reach too far in front of him, the pawn can't do that either. So instead, he attacks diagonally, right? He attacks with his tiny little arms diagonally. So that if a piece that is the opposite color of him is seated diagonally in front of him, he may attack, capture that piece, and put him in chess jail. Now, we never kill pieces in chess. We simply capture them and put them in jail. If we were to kill them, it would be very sad. We'd have to have a funeral. Everybody would cry, and then we could never play chess again. But no, instead, we capture our pieces and we put them in chess jail. Sometimes we even get to use some of those pieces later on in the game. Now, there's another thing about the pawn that you have to understand, and that is, whenever the pawn encounters another piece, he can't jump over that piece. In fact, if a pawn wants to jump onto a square and there's another piece there, he simply can't do it. He bumps his bald head and sits down. Okay? So, if the pawn is trying to jump off the bed onto this piece, he can't do that. But he can hop off of the bed. But now, let's say that the black team had their turn, and they moved a piece, and now it's the white team's turn again, and this white pawn wants to move. Can he move? Well, no, he can't move, because he would have to go forward. He can't go backwards. He would fall on his big bald head. Okay? So he has to go forward, but now he hits his bald head and sits there. So the pawn can't move forward at this moment unless a piece lands here or here, diagonally in front of him. At which point he could simply attack and capture that piece and put it in chess jail. But since these 2 pieces are seated right next to each other right now, well, they can't move. They have to sit there and wait until this piece is captured for this one to move, or this piece is captured for this one to move. Right now, they're just sitting there and waiting. And it's a very boring game for them. But hopefully, one piece gets captured. Then we have an interesting situation that can occur. This pawn can continue to move forward all the way to the other side of the chessboard. Now, boys and girls, what do you suppose happens when the pawn gets to the other side of the chessboard? You're right! He can change into another piece. What if he wants to change into another pawn? No, that's ridiculous, right? He wouldn't change into another pawn. What if he wants to change into a king? No, he can't change into a king. There can only be one king on each team. But if he wants to change into any other piece on the chessboard, right, once he gets to the other side, he can become anything else. So he can become a rook, a knight, a bishop, or a queen. Those are all the other pieces in chess. We'll go over those pieces in our next video. But if the pawn gets to the other side, it doesn't matter whether a piece is in chess jail or not. He can become anything he wants. I'll repeat that because most people don't quite understand that. If there's a piece in chess jail, it doesn't matter. The pawn gets to the other side, and if there's no pieces in chess jail on the side of the board, right, that have been captured, right, even if there are no pieces there, this little pawn can become any piece he wants. That's what we call pawn promotion, right? Pawn gets to the other side of the board, and he promotes. Or some people like to say, he graduates. Now, boys and girls, you are ready. You are prepared to graduate yourselves onto the next piece, which we call the knight. That will be in our next video. Until then, have fun playing chess. Bye-bye.